Hello and welcome to Healthy and Wealthy with Coach by SB on Instagram or Sarah for you, where we talk about all things fitness, nutrition, money, and whatever else comes to mind. So today's episode is episode 5, and we are going to be talking about retiring early. And to retire early, generally you need money. So I'm going to go through some options around how best to grow yourself a decent enough retirement fund so you're not working yourself into the ground. Now, this came off the back of a conversation with a very good friend of mine who works in the public sector, and the retirement age on some of the public sector pensions are not accessible until the age of about 65 or 68, depending on when you join the schemes. I am by no means a pension expert, but I do know how to generate wealth. And what does wealth do? Compound interest gives you enough money to buy you freedom. Freedom from working until you're 65, 68. So I'm going to go through that today. Firstly, I'm going to do a disclaimer though and tell you that this is not financial advice, and if you have specific questions around pensions, then you should speak to a pensions advisor or a financial advisor. It is just financial education, things for you to consider. So, and your capital is at risk with any investing. This is purely educational. And may I also say, if you do want to keep working for a longer time, then you also need to be taking care of your health. So this is why I always talk about the two together, because I don't think you can untangle the two from having a beautiful life when you look after your health and your wealth. So, because you can either work for a longer time, you can have a longer working age through being healthy, which might sound like hell if you don't really love your job, fine. But you could be doing something else if you've, still got all your cognitive function, which is improved through exercise and things like that. So, but the main focus today is on building a retirement pot. Firstly, all workplaces by law have to contribute up to a maximum of, I think it's 3%. If you put in 3%, it might be 1.5%. I can't, to be honest, remember, and I should have checked before I did the podcast. But anyway, your first port of call is always an employer's workplace pension, because you get the matched employer contributions, which is basically free money. I cannot fathom, and I have had insight into this, how many people do not contribute to a workplace pension. You are leaving money on the table. And let me tell you, if you always just do it, you don't notice it going out of your salary. So that's one thing I did from day one of starting to work. I said, I'm not very good with money, spend money like water. What am I going to do? Contribute to a pension. I was on a crap graduate salary, living in central London. We had a dog that was expensive in daycare and things like that, but I always contributed to a workplace pension and got the matched benefit. And some of those pots now, at the ripe old age of nearly 38, are a lot bigger than what they were, obviously, when I was contributing to them, when I was contributing next to nothing in them. So definitely, place number one to start is get the employer matched contributions. What I would say is be very aware of how your pension is performing, because what I have noticed is, or what you need to be careful of, and a pension advisor again may be able to tell you things around this. So I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty detail of this because some of this is quite specialist. But some funds may put you in, some pension accounts that you have through employer workplace schemes may not give you the best returns because you're in some bog standard, like low risk fund or whatever, that if you've left the place and you transfer out. Another thing is use a service and find where all of your pension pots are. Look at how they're performing. You can do things like consolidate them. There's sometimes exit fees, penalties. It's a pain in the ass still. I've moved a couple of pensions. I gave up on one because it was a pain in the ass. But you can have a limited amount of control over those pension pots. So first protocol is understand what you've actually got so far to date. Make sure you're making those bare minimum contributions. And then outside of that is what we're going to go into next. So if we're specifically looking at pensions, the best tax efficient way of investing into a retirement pot is through a self-invested personal pension. And this is specifically aimed at people who work in employed jobs. So self-employed, I'm a little bit less savvy with, I'll be honest. But I know there's different things like self-administered pension schemes and things like this. but we're not going to that today. So a self-invested personal pension is a private pension that you control. So you can claim back the tax on your deposits between 20% and 45%. So the government will automatically pay you in an additional 20% for the basic rate, and you have to fill in a self-assessment form to get to the higher rate tax rebate if you are a higher rate taxpayer. At the minute, you can withdraw from those at the age of 55, but I believe that age is moving up to 58 in 2028. So for most of us, it'll be the age of 58. So, and you're always at the whim and mercy of the next government and their decisions with some of these things. So you kind of can't always let tax laws dictate what you do with your funds. Obviously, you have to let tax laws dictate whether you do things inside the law or outside the law. Obviously, it goes without saying. But what I mean by that is if you're like, might need that money earlier than, I don't know, 60 or whatever, you can't guarantee that age isn't going to slip up. At the minute, you can take 25% of the whole pot up to a cap of 268,000 tax-free. So you could hit 58 and you could take that money out. And actually, if you're heading towards retirement and you're employed, it's worth having discussions with your employer if they pay you something like a golden goodbye or whatever, whether or not they could pay that direct into your pension, or whether or not you put bonuses direct into pension, particularly towards the end, because you do get that. You don't pay the tax on it and then you can take it back out. There's loads of things like that you can think about. And employers shouldn't really give a monkeys whether or not they're putting it in your pension or not. In fact, I think if you put it direct into pension, they save on NI contributions as well. So maybe you could negotiate getting a share of that. That wouldn't be a bad idea. Anyway, and then as with all pensions, you get taxed as income when you start drawing down on it. So if you are still working, you need to bear that in mind. If you're taking a pension and a private pension and working, you'll get taxed on whatever tax band you're sitting on the total of your earnings and what you withdraw out. And same as if you withdraw out. So you can put it in now to avoid the tax now, but if you're withdrawing and it pushes you into the 45% tax band or whatever at the other side, then there are all considerations to make. So you can invest into a SIPP, but it also takes into account of your workplace pension contributions, a maximum of 60k per annum across all pensions. That's your kind of personal allowance. Now, if you hit earnings of £260,000 per annum, then this drops to 10k, and there is a taper. So you do have to be mindful of that. The other thing that you can do, which is quite cool, you can go back and use the past 3 years' unused allowances. So that means that if you hadn't contributed anything for the past 3 years, you'd obviously have 90k additional that you could contribute to a pension, which is pretty cool. So that's kind of SIPPs. So a SIPP is just like an ISA, I kind of consider them like bank accounts, really. You can pick any sort of SIPP provider. What you can buy within that SIPP will differ depending on who you purchase them with. Some people won't have SIPP offerings. Some people will. Some will be completely managed. Some you will be able to buy shares inside of and whatever else, but I'll get into that in a bit. So picking a SIPP provider, I would always, just like a bank account, look at fees, usability of the app, things like that. I think I did an Instagram post on selecting things like this at one point that I probably could tag in here. The next option you've got, which has way more flexibility but isn't as tax efficient because the cap is smaller, is a stocks and shares ISA, which is a tax-free investment account. And you have different options around this. You have a DIY, robo-managed, and fully managed. Robo-managed basically is where I think they just use AI to manage the fund instead of a person. So the fees are usually cheaper on them. And when they say manage it, they manage it to your risk profile. So you can have you can buy the same, you could invest into a stocks and shares ISA that's managed as two different people. And if you set yourself as being, don't like risk and all that, and would cry if my shares drop, blah, 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 your returns might be lower because they invest less in equities. which is like shares and stuff like that, and more into bonds, and they'd hold a bit more cash. Whereas in typically, if you ratchet up your risk and say, yeah, YOLO, don't care if it's going up or down, then they will invest you more into equities where the risk and reward are like at the other end of the spectrum. So higher risk usually means higher reward. Not always. And obviously you can always lose money and stuff like that. So, you know. Anyway, stocks and shares ISA. So you can invest up to £20,000 per annum tax-free. This means £20,000 of deposits. So if you put £20,000 in and your account goes beyond £20,000 and it's £25,000, whatever, that doesn't mean that you don't get taxed on any of that. So whatever contributions you put in, and you can do this every year from April 1st is when your allowance resets. You can select investments inside of it and you can withdraw it at any time, but I will caution you that if you withdraw it, you cannot then put it back in the same tax year once you've withdrawn it. If you've done the maximum of 20,000, you withdraw it, and then a month later you put money back in and you go over the 20,000, that's not allowed, basically, so don't do that. If you are investing, the rule of thumb is a minimum of 5 years. So unlike the SIP where you actually can't touch it until certain ages, with the ISA, because you can withdraw it, you just need to be really mindful of the fact that you should be looking at least a 5-year time horizon there. Because, like we say, money goes up as well as down, and you know, you might not see that in your social media at the minute because we're in a massive bull run and everyone's making money. It's like the easiest time at the minute to make money, but it'll be a very different story. Not if, but when that tide changes, because it will. So you need to have nerves of steel, let me tell you, because if you buy at the top and it sinks low, you might be like... Anyway, so the types of investments you can make into these two tax-free wrappers or whatever. And I'm going to go through them from low risk to high risk. So we've got high interest savings. So if you're really, really risk averse, you know, because inflation is quite high, because general interest rates are high, some of the high interest savings accounts are not too bad. And particularly, I think there's some options where the longer you lock money away for, potentially the higher interest you get and things like that. So that's always an option to you. Now, I say that is low risk, but what I would caution is that inflation is eating your cash. If interest rates are below inflation rates, your cash is still being eaten effectively, and it has less buying power. No one ever got rich off investing in a high interest savings account. Well, if they did, DM me and let me know how you cracked on with it. But next, I would say is like premium bonds, gilts. So premium bonds are like the government run. They work on a price basis, but they have a worked out percentage interest thing. That around 3%. It's quite low, basically, but they work on a price basis. And then you've got like, sorry about that, by the way, my door was just blowing open with the wind. Low cost index funds. Sorry, premium bonds. So yeah, so you can win prizes. You have the potential to win £1 million with them, which is quite appealing to some people. It's a bit like playing the lottery, but you don't lose what you invest. And I think you can invest up to 50,000 tax-free. And again, the winnings on that is tax-free, so there's that advantage to those. Bonds and gilts are like basically you lend in the government money and then them paying you back some interest when it matures. It's the most simple way of understanding that without getting, you know, into the nuts and bolts. Low-cost index funds. So, low-cost index funds are my favourite thing in the world, to be honest with you, because they are like a shopping basket of shares. So everyone's always, the most popular one being the S&P 500, right? I don't know if it is actually, maybe the World Tracker one is a better one or whatever, but there's various low-cost index funds, and all these are like passive funds that track the activity of the underlying assets. So with the S&P 500, for example, you kind of are buying tiny fractions of shares in 500 different US-based companies. S&P stands for Standard & Poor's, which is a ratings agency, basically, and it's their assessment of the top 500 companies in the USA. You get a variety of industries in there. So like there's oil and gas companies in there. There might be like credit card companies in there. There's supermarkets in there. There's the Magnificent Seven, which is the top 7 tech companies, which is like Microsoft, Apple, Jesus, who else? Microsoft, Apple, Meta, Alphabet, which is Google, Nvidia, which is the chip maker. Tesla was in it. I think they got pushed out, and Broadcom are now in there. And I always forget number 7. I can't remember 7 things because I can't remember what I've said and what I haven't said. Anyway, and it's weighted to the top 7. It's weighted as in you technically buy a little bit more of the bigger companies and a little bit less of the others. And you've got different types of S&P 500. If you searched S&P 500 in Trading 212, there's different companies that track it. And there are also ones that distribute a dividend, or ones that accumulate a dividend and reinvest that dividend. I'll go over dividends in another one if it's confusing for you to understand. So, low-cost index funds, you're buying a basket of shares, not geographically spread if it's the S&P 500 because it's in the USA, but spread across a lot of industries. Now, some industries are okay during recession, some are not, for example. So you've got a bit of a spread there, price sensitivity and all that. I don't know if anyone's done economics, but there's all that sort of stuff going on. If you picked World Tracker, it would track like, I don't know, depends on which one you pick, but they'll track global spread of companies. So if you believe that the world is going to continue to grow and we are a capitalist society, then, you know, your money is, I can't say that your money's going to be safe, but your capital is at risk, but you have a bigger spread of diversification, which helps your risk. Anyway, then you have what I kind of have already touched on really is actively managed funds, robo-managed funds and things like that. Now, the fees with these are typically higher because they're not just tracking they're not passively tracking, it's someone actually managing on your behalf and buying, so they take a fee, usually a percentage of assets under management or something like that. You know, they're always trying to beat the market. Warren Buffett famously had a 10-year bet with a hedge fund manager who, you know, that if he just invested in the S&P 500, his returns would be better than this other guy trying to beat the market. And I believe he won the bet. And then they gave the money to charity. Then you have, and the reason I put actively managed funds as higher risk than low cost index funds is just because of the fact that they're probably higher cost and things like that. Then you have single stocks or shares. Now, these are fairly risky in that companies can go bust alone. They absolutely can. It happened in the dot-com crash, which is why people lost money. But that's not to say that, you know, if you bought some shares in Microsoft, it's ubiquitous in our lives, isn't it? It's like everybody has Microsoft in an office. I don't really see someone upending that. They're investing in AI, or they are AI at the minute, aren't they, really? Don't they own OpenAI? Stuff like that. So, but then you could buy shares in, I don't know, a retailer, for example, that goes bust, whatever. So they are more risky and probably not advisable for your first investment. And you don't have to, like, you know, pay much attention because if you buy an index fund, your risk is already spread. Whereas if you buy a single share, you might want to be keeping up to date as to what they're doing, things like that. And then you've got like crypto and other alternative assets. I've not really gone into gold and stuff like that. I mean, like, I know it's been in the news recently, but I don't know. Whatever. Crypto and other alternative assets. I don't really believe gold's as safe as what people say it is personally. I don't really see there's that much value in it. Is it a depleting commodity on Earth? Probably, but who cares? Fun fact though, I think I think I saw this somewhere in India, because women weren't allowed to have like bank accounts or money or something, they used to like buy gold jewelry to keep hold of their wealth, something like that. I've probably butchered that story, so really apologies if I have. But I just read that so much, quite interesting. Crypto and other alternative assets though. So cryptocurrency, markets are very, very volatile, and I definitely would not advise this for somebody who's starting out in investing. And also, it's quite hard to buy these. It's only just come out in the UK that you can buy Bitcoin ETNs, which are a bit like they track Bitcoin prices effectively. And you have to kind of go through a load of questions on Trading 212 if you want to buy Bitcoin within a tax-free stocks and shares ISA. So it's not like a first time investment thing, and if it's linked to your pension, it's up to you, do what you want, but I wouldn't advise it as someone starting out and wanting to grow a retirement fund. So you buy all of these assets inside either a SIPP or a stocks and share ISA, and then hopefully your money grows and compounds over time. Compound interest is absolutely magic. So if it took you 7 years to get your first 100K, it might only take you another 5 years to get to 200K, and so on and so forth. So it compounds. It's like, I always like the image of like a snowball going down a mountain that causes an avalanche. That's kind of what compound interest in is. So yeah, that's kind of your options on planning for retirement. And I would say I have a really great spreadsheet, which is just like a 1-page financial spreadsheet that you can input your details, like your age, your current age, when you want to retire, how much you've got to invest, and it would tell you if you've got enough to live on based on the life expectancy age. I think is like 83 for a woman, which is quite cool. And you just have to input really simple information. I also have a really good budget tracking sheet where you can track your wealth and things like that. And these are all things that I've just used in my own life because I'm a bit of a nerd, and I have tracked my wealth, and I do track things and I love a spreadsheet because I am an accountant. Yeah, so if you want any of those resources, and you're listening to this, then get in touch with me on Instagram or through my website or email me. However you can see to get in touch with me, please do. And I will share them with you for free. And don't worry about asking me for things. I'm not going to be like, you need to buy this off me, blah, blah, blah. That's not how I operate. My passion in life is to make women independent, understand their money, get their bodies in shape, and live a good effing life. That's all. So if that sounds like a bit of you, DM me. And I will do more of these if you tell me what's of interest to you. I would love to know. Drop me a comment if anybody's listening out there. Great. And that's all for this week. So my actual insight there, I guess, is to probably firstly go and see what your situation is. Assess your situation. Never bury your head in the sand because it doesn't get easier. And then, yeah, you can take control over things you can manage, can't you? So if you measure it, you can manage it. All the best. Have a great day.